And if I want to be the best version of myself, then I need a partner that's going to be the best version of themselves. And that doesn't necessarily get confined within the idea of a traditional gender role.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Do You Know Black Creators Kickback. I'm Alyssa.
And I'm Darnell, and we're the creators and executive producers of the Do You Know Black game show and the Do You Know Black Kickback.
Today, we're going to be talking about the latest episode of the Do You Know Black Kickback, which talks about gender roles, relationships, and the Black family.
In this episode, Lamont asked if traditional gender roles are beneficial to a healthy and productive Black family. So with that context, Alyssa, I'll let you start. Do you feel that traditional gender roles are beneficial to a productive and healthy Black family?
I think that roles are essential for a healthy Black family. It doesn't necessarily need to be traditional gender roles, but I do think having structure in a Black family is important. Historically, that's been something that's been ripped away from us. So I do think that it's important for us, in order to elevate the Black community, I do think that we need to get that structure back into the community.
Yeah, this was an interesting episode because it was very polarizing in the sense that you had Bo Irene, who had a perspective on traditional gender roles, and somebody that he brought up initially was Kevin Samuels, and he has a really big platform where he talks about why Black women are unmarried, how Black women being unmarried is detrimental to our community, and what Black women can do to become married. And Bo Irene seems to agree with a lot of his perspectives. I view a relationship, any relationship in life or any situation that you're in where you have to work with other people, it's about a team. And in any team situation, roles are important, but in productive teams and healthy teams, roles are assigned based on what your strengths are and what your interests are and what your passions are. So when I think about work, for example, work team, something that I know what I'm good at. When it comes to work, I think I'm very good at big picture thinking, future or forward thinking. I'm very good at understanding concepts, bringing people together, managing a lot of different things, working under tight deadlines and pressure. I'm very good at that. Something that I'm not very good at is things that require attention to detail. That's not my strength. So when I think about hiring managers, for example, let's say that a hiring manager is hiring a team. They have one person that's really strong with people, but very poor in attention to detail. They're probably going to want their next hire to be somebody that can fill some of those gaps that the other person doesn't have. I think of the same thing about like a relationship, where you're in a relationship with somebody and you have to understand, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And what are my goals in life? What do I want? And who is a person that I would want on my team that can complement me in working towards those goals? So roles are definitely important in any situation, because life, I think, is about efficiency and effectiveness, and clearly defined roles that are aligned with goals and skills, I think, help people be more effective. And I do think that we as a people, Black families, can use that structure, as you mentioned, to help us work towards some of these goals. So I do agree, but when it comes to traditional, that's when I think this question gets very interesting.
When we talk about traditional in the sense is the European, the Eurocentric idea of what a relationship is, where the woman is essentially the carer of the family. She takes care of the family. The man is the provider for the family, but the woman will essentially they'll get married, have kids, and she'll take care of the kids as like a housewife. And then the man provides. And there's just, I think it's such an outdated view of what roles are in comparison to today's society, but especially as it relates to the Black community, the Black family specifically, because I remember I read an article and they were talking about this, where the Black families never really fit into that spectrum, just in general. We've never fell in the spectrum of we're going to be stay-at-home wives, taking care of the kids, because given our socioeconomic status at the time when all of these things were kind of coming into fruition in society, we've always needed to provide additional income for our families. So when we've had the chance to work, when we talk about the Black Rosies and World War II, and when opportunities actually opened up for Black women to take jobs, we had to take it. We had to stay within those roles, regardless of whether you wanted to or not. It was important for the family because we weren't in economic status to be able to stay home if we wanted to. So that never really applied to us. So when people talk about the traditional role, that was never really something that was a common thing for Black families. It was a thing for some families, for middle class, but they had done a study and they were talking about this. This was like in the 90s. They did a study where they were interviewing middle class Black families, and even within middle class Black families at that point, they were still at that point equals, way more equal than this whole Eurocentric idea of what a family looked like. When they interviewed the men felt like the women should be contributing equal to what they were contributing to, both financially as well as within the household. So I think that's where it's interesting, because when you get the idea of like the pushback of when you hear about the pushback that Black women have with the roles that have been projected onto them about you needing to take care of the kids or do this and do that, but at the same time you're still expected to contribute half. I think that's where kind of the chasm came within the community, where it's saying we've already proven and done. Lamont mentions this in the episode where he talks about how Black women are like the most educated group in America, and that's true. We're also obviously highly educated and out-earn Black men by a significant amount. So when you talk about that, and then the idea that at the same time you have expectations for us, it causes a break for you to put a requirement on me, but you're not able to, or not actively contributing the same amount. I think that is where the chasm is caused, where we feel like, okay, you can't put these expectations on me if you're not even on my level, in that sense. So I feel like that's kind of where the issue comes into play with like power and status and who's really the keeper of the home in these relationships. But,
Yeah, everything you said is valid. I think being thorough is very important, and thorough in how we think is very important. And going through all of the steps of thorough thought is important. So what do I mean by that? A lot of times when you have discussions or complex discussions with people that don't necessarily want to face a certain truth, they'll skip steps. So it's like, we'll go step 1. Okay, we agree on step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. And in order to get to a point where we can have a consensus on step 5, you had to go from steps 1 to 4 as well. But we've all been in discussions and debates with people. It's like when you get to step 3, it's like people are jumping all over the place. It's like, no, because you're avoiding step 3 because that's when your logic and your thought process falls apart. And I think that this is what happens when we start talking about gender roles in the sense that why people feel that they're necessary. So I think, once again, any relationship, just as humans, it's rooted in survival and progress. There was probably a period when gender roles probably made more sense in where we were as a race. I believe that, once again, I'm not somebody that watches a lot of Kevin Samuels, but I believe one of the things that he's said is he always brings up how men are the engineers, men are the people that build the world, men are the ones that build the infrastructure, men are the ones that do this and that. I hire somebody to do that. I don't do that, right? Like if something happened with our roof, I'm hiring a contractor, or you might hire a contractor. My day job, I work behind a computer. A woman can do my job. I think I'm very good at my job, whether it's a man or a woman, but like a woman can do my job just as effectively as I can do my job. So a lot of times I think men take on this idea of the man that was required 200 years ago, right? When like I didn't have to go to ShopRite to eat. I had to go and hunt, right? And because I'm out hunting and I don't know how long that might take, or farming, or whatever it is, something that's extremely manual where you might say like objectively, physically, like a man might do this. So a lot of times men will hold on to this historic, outdated version of a man that doesn't necessarily apply to where we are as a society today, where we're living in excess, where technology does a lot of the work for us, and there are things, there are resources available that make it so that you can have, you can let yourself go of some of those responsibilities. So it doesn't necessarily apply in today's society. However, roles, generally speaking, identifying what is an effective way for us to attack life so we can both work towards the type of life and the type of experience that we want. What's the most effective way for us to do that together and efficient with our time? And any relationship, people have to identify what that means for them.
So I think that the struggle that we've had specifically within the Black community is that, we've already addressed the fact that Black women out-earn and are overeducated as compared to their Black male counterparts. So there's already a need, there's already a sense within the community, within Black men, that they're not needed in the same way as other races. We're the only race where the women out-earn and are overeducated in as comparison to our counterparts. The only race. And because of that, and then obviously systemically with things in society in which Black men are less available. You know, there are more Black men that are incarcerated. We have the most homeless men within the community. We have less Black men available for marriage and for partnership than other races do. And I think as a result of that, Black women have carried a lot for a long time. And a lot of it was due to, there's two critical stages in which this all came into play. So obviously we have slavery, when Black men were taken away from, they were ripped away from their families. And that took away power from them, which is a big thing that we'll touch on later. But that took away power from them, but it also kind of forced Black women in their roles within that space to have to act independently. Fast forward to the 60s, 50s, 60s, around that time, that was another critical period in which Black men were ripped from the homes. At this point, you have the government that's actually a part of, an active factor in ripping them out of the homes. When you think about the social services programs and the families that were struggling in order to even qualify and even be able to receive services, you could not have a man in the home. So at this point, that also encouraged women to not have men actively in your life or in your home, because you would lose money as a result of having them there. So I feel like there was very key periods in time which drove men out. And because of that, they feel like there's still this kind of chasm between Black men and Black women in which they feel, or we feel, that they're not needed. And I think that a big part of that is the whole idea of like power and hierarchy and who's going to take the lead. And I feel like the idea, even though I know that we're very capable of, as Black women, of taking care of ourselves, I do still feel like there should be a place for Black men. And I think that when we talk about the idea of how we can fix fix this chasm between us, I think that it does require us making space for them. So I think that that is where we need to go back and say, what can I do? Like, not emasculating them, not demeaning them, giving them a role in the home, even if we are more educated or making more, finding a role for them. And I think that that's where we need to kind of get to, where we decide collectively, like, what are you going to contribute? Like, what's going to be your role? What's going to be my role? It doesn't matter if I know I can do this. This is something that I will trust you to do and trust for you to do, because you're my partner and I value you, and you can contribute equally to our household in the capacity that you can.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that you stated there. I think the first thing that I think about is when we say traditional gender roles, I think that has to be defined, right? Like we watch Married at First Sight together, and when we watch it, there's one person on not to date this episode or anything, but there's one person on there that talks about like the need to have their wife cooking and cleaning. So when people talk, or when men or platforms or whoever, when they talk about traditional gender roles, I guess the first question is, what does that mean? Does that mean that, traditionally speaking, the man should be the one earning the money, bringing the money home, paying the bills, handling anything physical? The woman, if they want to work as like a secondary income, that's great, but I still am the primary breadwinner, and then the woman's main value add is not financial, but it's more so maternal and domestic in nature, where it's focusing on, hey, cooking, cleaning, raising our kids. Is that, if we are to assume that that is what is meant by traditional gender roles? So I guess first off, is this what you think people mean when they're saying traditional gender roles?
I think it's what they think they mean, but it's not, because at the same time, those same people also still expect that your wife is going to be bringing in something, right? Like, even the episode that we're talking about for this show, the Married at First Sight show, you still expect your wife to work full time, but you still, in addition to that, want her to cook all of your meals and clean the house and do all of these other things. And I think that the big issue that brought up was the idea that you're valuing someone, you're placing a value on someone's ability to cook and clean, when you can easily hire someone to clean your house, right? You can easily hire someone to deliver your meals. You can order out, you can do all of these things. That doesn't define you as a wife and what you contribute to the relationship off of those two things. It just doesn't. And the fact that if it was really truly traditional, you would not expect her to do those things in addition to working. So it's not. I feel like it's a half-assed argument, because you want them to still be modern in the sense that they're going to actively be working and then come home and take care of the kids and then clean and cook and all of these other things while you continue to do whatever you're doing and whatever you're contributing. And it's not a fair shake. At the end of the day, I feel like that whole entire argument is questionable. I feel like everybody needs to contribute something. And I think we've talked about this, like just the idea of whatever it is that you have to contribute, that's going to be what you contribute. Like, we're better at different things, right? So I feel like we've kind of fallen into a little bit more of what they would classify as traditional, because of the things that I like to do more versus the things that you prefer to do. But at the end of the day, I know that if I wanted you to do something, like if I want you to cook, you're going to cook, right? You know, I don't doubt that if I need you to jump in on something that I don't feel like doing, or I'm not able to do in that moment, that you're going to pick that up, and vice versa. I would not be beside doing anything that is classified as a traditional male role. I feel like we need to get away from those. And I think that it's also really not harmful, but I think that it's never been applicable to Black people. I think that we always classify these things in tradition and this and this and that, but you have to go back and remember that we didn't have the luxury of taking on these roles for the most part, in general. So they were saying like maybe middle class and up at the time back in the day would have been able to be housewives, but generally Black women have always had to work to support our families because we've been in a status as a community. We've been in a place where we couldn't afford not to have two people working. And if two people weren't working, we were in a really bad place. So we had to make ends meet in other ways. So I think that we need to be very careful when we use language like that because it wasn't always applicable to Black families.
Yeah. Well, the more so the question that I asked, and don't disagree with anything you said, more so the question that I'm saying is, first, for talking about defining traditional. Traditional is not to say that you, and this is just putting my thoughts or putting myself in the shoes of somebody that thinks a certain type of way. I don't think that a woman, I think what they would say is, yes, you would work, but that's not your main function. That's not your main priority. Just like, for example, if a man has to do something for the kid or a child at some point, they would do that for that person, but they wouldn't say, hey, that's not like my main function. It's not, let's say that, let's do this mathematically, right? Where it's saying we're giving weights to function. We're giving weights to roles. So a man in that sense might say, okay, my role when it comes to the weight of earning money and bringing money in and being the breadwinner, like I'll put 80% weight to that. But that person might say, I expect my wife in this traditional sense, or my partner in this traditional sense, to have a 20% weight towards that. But then when it comes to cooking, cleaning, raising the kids or whatever, a person would think in that way, that's where you give your 80%. Whereas for me, I'll give 20% there. So I think that that's what people would expect because nobody just does one thing, but I think it's about assigning weights. I have my perspective on it, but which is not that, but would you agree that that is what they mean when they're saying traditional gender roles, when people talk about traditional gender roles?
I agree. I agree with, I can say it that I agree with that. And in terms of whether I agree with that being the definition and whether I agree with that being the outcome and I guess just the process in which we should be moving as a community, I'm still out on that. I will say that I think that I feel very strongly that the roles in general are important. I feel like we as a community are lacking structure deeply. And I feel like those types, even the traditional gender roles, will help bring that back. Regardless of how we feel about it personally, I do feel like it will bring structure back into the community because I think we've gotten to a place where a lot of, 1 in 4 or 3 in 4, I'm mixing up the statistics right now, of Black women being single. We hear the stats all the time. Raising the household, like raising our families, and these are great. We were both raised by single mothers, and we can sit there and say, you know, we're fine. I think Rocky mentions that when she's talking about it, you know, when she talked about it, about her being raised by her and her 4 siblings being raised by a single mom, and they turned out, you know, they were all fine. And we say the same thing. We're like, oh, I didn't notice the difference, and I didn't But I can also say that I'm sure that life would have been much different if I did have a father there, right? Like if I did have a second income in the least, right? I think would have made a big impact on my mother raising twins on her own, at a young age, all of these things. I feel like as a community, we've gotten way too used to that. And I think that it's been not that has been harmful, but I think that the idea that we've kind of just been sitting and accepting that as fact, like accepting the fact that like women are raising men, right? Like single women are raising men. And we're saying like they're growing up, they're being great. Your mom did a great job with you, I'll say, like, I think, right? But at the same time, like not everybody's gonna be you. Like there's plenty of other men who are very impressionable and whose life could have been very different if they had had that figure in their life. And I think that that's what we need to step away from, accepting that as the standard for our community when it's not in any other culture. We're like the only culture where the women are raising an entire family on their own, because there are other communities where there's shared responsibilities and the woman is the matriarch, is sort of like also an equal head or the head of household, but they're still part of a 2-parent household. And that's something that we've gotten way too used to not having. And I think that it's important for us to get that structure back into the community because we've obviously seen what it's done to our community.
So I'm gonna disagree with you on something. And there was a very important detail that you missed. The important detail is that I did not have a father in the house, but I had a 2-adult household. It was my mom and my aunt. And that's a very important distinction.
I had my aunt and my grandmother.
Exactly.
My mom and my grandmother.
You had exactly, that's my point. You didn't have your father there, but you had your mother and your grandmother there. My mom and my aunt, now I'm not, as obviously, I'm just putting information. I'm not taking a position, but thorough matters. I had my mom and my, you're shaking your head, but I'm not, I didn't even,
you had
I
2 women. Same thing. You had 2 women, 2 amazing women, but 2 women in the least. Like it's,
well, listen,
it's the same thing.
Well, listen. My thing is, you're shaking your head. I didn't even state an opinion yet. I'm just putting information out there. So what I'm saying is, so that's an important distinction when we start talking about this. My mom and my aunt raised me. So this is when we talk about conversations like this, it's important that we're thorough, because what ends up happening is what your statement, which I don't disagree with anything you said, but it does include probably 5 different situations that each need to be addressed. So the first thing is talking about, that's why I was starting with the idea of traditional gender roles, and if that's what it is. So that's one. And what does that mean and why does that exist? The second thing we're talking about is the idea of raising children alone. That's a second thing completely. Alone or having 2 people. Because Fontaine spoke about that also when she talked about, we always talk about a village raises a child. A lot of us had that experience.
I disagree with that.
Well, whether it's productive or it's not productive, I'm not even going to get into that yet. We're just still talking information. So that's number 2, is the idea of individuals raising kids versus a village raising kids, and if that's an effective approach. I'm not even talking if it's effective or not. I'm just saying that's a question to be asked, right? So these are like 2 things that can get put together. So first, before we get into the other ones, when we talk about like the effectiveness of single parenting, the effectiveness of villages, then we talk about the effectiveness of having a man in the household, then we talk about the idea of women earning men, and then what are the implications of that? And then we also talk about the idea of men's feeling emasculated or feeling like they don't have a place in the home. A lot of times when we have conversations like this, we jump from this point to that point, to that point, to that point, to that point, all these different points, and then we never really wrap our head around any one of them. But if we just focus specifically on, okay, a man's role in the house, women out earn men in America. What does that mean for us as a people? And women are not necessarily seeing the need to have a man there anymore. And what does that mean? Or a man is not necessarily feeling that they have a place anymore. So if we just focus on that first, this is where I'll state, I guess, my second opinion is I think the problem with this thought process is, what do we view as the purpose of having somebody else in my life? I think that's an important question.
It's multiple things.
Exactly. It is multiple things. But we don't want to skip over that question to jump to some of those other ones. So I'll say for me personally, the idea of the traditional gender role that I defined earlier, if you agree with that definition, and if you all agree with that definition of gender role, for me, I have no interest in that type of thing, because for me, like, I don't need you to cook for me. Like, I cook for myself, you cook for yourself, and that's perfectly fine. It's efficient for how we live. We're both business professionals. We both have day jobs. We're bringing in very close to the same income. We have similar overall financial goals where we want to grow a certain way financially together. We have a vision of, hey, how do I want my life to be? When I wake up every day, how do I want to feel? Right? Like, what's important to me as an individual? Like, where do I want to be in 1 year, in 5 years? What is it going to take to get there? And who do I want on my team that would want to work towards that same goal? So for me, a woman, and I don't think if somebody wants the traditional gender role, no problem at all. But I know for me, I would never want to be with that person. And maybe it's because that's not who my mother was. But for me, I would prefer somebody that's like you, that's you know, you all right, you know? You all right. But with somebody like you, where it's saying, hey, like, I don't need you to cook. I don't need to have food ready when I come home, because the reality is you're working too. I would rather know that you're at work, grinding, growing mentally, tapping into like your full potential, because if I see you tapping into your full potential, that motivates me to tap into my full potential. If I see that you're being unlocked and you're pursuing these things, then that motivates me to pursue these things. And if I want to be the best version of myself, then I need a partner that's going to be the best version of themselves. And that doesn't necessarily get confined within the idea of a traditional gender role. However, there may be another person that's saying, no. I want to work and I want comfort. When I come home, I want food there. I want comfort. I want a clean house. I don't need my wife to do anything. I make enough money. I work hard, but I want somebody that can do that. Then in that situation, what they're gonna have to do is they're gonna have to find a woman who shares that same life vision as that person, that can say, hey, the life I view for myself fits within that perspective for you. And both are okay, but the thing that I would say is neither are necessary. So gender roles or whatever, gender roles are not necessary. The only, in my opinion, necessity when it comes to relationships is identifying the person that aligns with the type of life that you want to live.